Stop everything you're doing right now. What you're about to hear will either change your life forever, or you'll spend the rest of your days wondering what could have been if you had truly listened. This isn't just another speech about struggle and hope. This is a blueprint for revolution, delivered by someone who has stared empire in the face and refused to blink. My name is IBRAHIM TRAORÉ, and I'm speaking to you from Burkina Faso, but my words carry the weight of an entire awakening continent. I've seen governments fall, witnessed the machinery of oppression from the inside, and watched as ordinary people transform themselves into unstoppable forces of change. Today, I'm going to share with you secrets that those in power never wanted you to discover. But first, let me ask you something that will haunt you. What if I told you that everything you've been conditioned to believe about your limitations, your history, and your potential is not just wrong, but deliberately designed to keep you powerless? Brothers and sisters in Black America, I don't speak to you as some distant observer commenting on your struggle from afar. I speak to you as someone who recognizes the identical fire burning in your eyes, the same fire I see in the eyes of every African who has decided that enough is enough. I know this fire because it burns in my chest too, ignited by the same injustices, fueled by the same dreams of true freedom. You might wonder what gives me the authority to address you with such boldness. Let me tell you what I've witnessed. I've seen how global power structures operate when they think no one is watching. I've observed their board meetings, their private communications, their strategic plans that treat entire populations like chess pieces on their game board. I've watched them orchestrate conflicts, manipulate currencies, and orchestrate the rise and fall of leaders across Africa. But more importantly, I've seen what happens when people who have been told they are nothing finally remember they are everything. Our pain may wear different costumes across different continents. Police brutality in your cities, economic colonization in our villages, educational apartheid in your schools, resource theft in our lands. But make no mistake, it flows from the same poisoned well. The oppression, the systematic theft, the calculated humiliation designed to break our spirits. It's all part of one massive, coordinated system that spans the globe. Yet here we stand, unbroken, unbowed, still breathing, still fighting, still creating beauty in the midst of chaos. And this reality, our continued existence, our refusal to disappear, our insistence on thriving despite everything, this is what terrifies them most. But before I continue, I need you to understand something that will reshape everything you thought you knew about power. The greatest weapon they ever used against us wasn't the whip, wasn't the gun, wasn't even the economic policies designed to keep us dependent. The greatest weapon was convincing us that we are separate from each other, that our struggles are individual rather than collective, that our destinies are unconnected. I come to you today with no superiority complex, no condescending attitude, only raw truth delivered with the love of someone who sees you as family. I have spent years studying the games that world powers play, the strategies they use to exploit, divide, and weaken entire populations. I have watched from the inside as they perfect the art of making the oppressed grateful for their chains. They whisper constantly in your ears through their media, their educational systems, their cultural institutions that you are powerless. They have created an entire industry dedicated to convincing you that you must beg for scraps at tables you helped build with your blood, sweat, and genius. They want you to see yourself as eternal victims, dependent on their mercy, their systems, their validation for your very sense of worth. But I'm here to obliterate that illusion with the force of undeniable truth. You are not beggars, and you never were. You are the builders of architectural marvels that modern engineers study but cannot replicate. You are warriors whose military strategies are analyzed in academies worldwide because of their brilliance and effectiveness. You are thinkers whose philosophical frameworks shape the moral foundations of civilizations across multiple continents. You are creators whose innovations in science, mathematics, medicine, and technology they have systematically claimed as their own for centuries. You are the people who gave birth to human civilization itself when others were still learning to make fire consistently. Your history doesn't just echo across continents. It reverberates through every major advancement in human knowledge and culture. We have watched you march through the streets of Birmingham with a dignity so profound it shamed the most hardened segregationists. We witnessed you organize in Montgomery, transforming a simple bus boycott into a masterclass in economic warfare that brought the entire system to its knees. We've seen you shout down injustice from Selma to Ferguson, from Watts to Baltimore, each time creating ripple effects that inspired liberation movements from Soweto to São Paulo, from London to Lagos. We watched you build universities when they denied you education, create businesses when they excluded you from theirs, establish churches when they barred you from worship, form communities when they tried to scatter you to the winds. You literally built nations from nothing, took scraps, and created empires of culture that now influence every corner of the globe. They gave you pain, and you transformed it into jazz that moves souls across all racial lines. They gave you limitation, and you created blues that speaks to universal human experience. They gave you exclusion, and you built hip-hop that became the most influential cultural force of the modern era. They gave you broken communities, and you created movements that changed laws, shifted consciousness, and inspired oppressed people worldwide to stand up and demand their dignity. But here's what they desperately hope you never figure out. The fight is not over. In fact, it has evolved into something far more subtle and dangerous than anything your ancestors faced. The enemy has simply learned new tactics, developed more sophisticated weapons. Where they once used physical chains, they now use psychological programming. Where they once relied on legal segregation, they now employ economic policies that achieve the same results. Where they once burned crosses to terrorize you, they now program algorithms to limit your opportunities and amplify negative stereotypes about your communities. They have mastered the art of oppression through deception so subtle you don't recognize it as oppression. They create distraction so entertaining you forget what you should be focused on. They manufacture confusion so complete you begin to question your own lived experiences and inherited wisdom. And here's the key to understanding everything that happens in global politics, economics, and social policy. They fear unity among people who know their true worth more than they fear any army, any nuclear weapon, any natural disaster. They have contingency plans for economic collapse, for climate change, for pandemics, for wars between nations. But they have no effective defense against the unity of conscious people who understand their collective power and decide to use it strategically. They fear specifically when black voices in America connect with their family in Africa. They panic when you link hands with your relatives in Jamaica, in Brazil, in London, in Paris. They deploy massive resources to prevent you from looking past the artificial borders they drew on maps and seeing the truth that we are one people, scattered by historical forces but never truly lost to each other. Divided, we are manageable. Separate, we can be controlled, manipulated, played against each other. But united, truly united in purpose and action, we become a storm that no force on earth can withstand or redirect. Now listen carefully, because this next truth will fundamentally alter how you see yourself. You are not just Americans who happen to have dark skin. That limiting identity serves their purposes because it keeps you isolated, makes you think your struggle is purely domestic, convinces you that you're alone in this fight against systems designed to exploit you. You are sons and daughters of a stolen continent, carriers of bloodlines that connect you to the most advanced civilizations in human history. That blood flowing through your veins right now carries the genetic memory of kingdoms that ruled when Europe was emerging from what they accurately call the Dark Ages. That spirit residing in your chest is literally unbreakable because it has survived and thrived through experiences that would have destroyed any other people in human history. Never, and I cannot emphasize this strongly enough, never allow anyone to reduce you to statistics on their research reports, to stereotypes in their media representations, to silence in their decision-making processes. You were not born to merely survive the systems they created to limit you. Survival was never the ultimate goal. You were born to lead transformations, to build institutions that reflect your values, to reclaim not only what was taken from you personally, but what was stolen from your children and all the generations yet to come. The time has arrived, not next year, not after the next election, not when conditions become more favorable. The time is now to remember who you really are. Not just the sanitized versions they allowed you to learn in schools designed to produce compliant workers rather than critical thinkers. Not just the limited narratives they permitted in history books written by people who never experienced your reality. I'm talking about what your ancestors whispered to each other in the darkness of slave ships when they thought no one could hear them. What your great-grandmothers passed down through songs, stories, and sayings that seemed simple but carried profound wisdom. What your hearts have always known, but your minds have been systematically trained to doubt through centuries of psychological warfare. We in Africa, and yes, I said you're Africa, because that's exactly what it is. We are not sitting here passively waiting to be rescued by anyone. That narrative of the helpless continent dependent on foreign charity is one of the most successful lies ever told, designed specifically to justify continued exploitation while making the exploiters feel virtuous about their theft. But we are also not content to walk this path toward liberation alone anymore. We understand that our struggle and your struggle are not parallel fights happening in different locations. They are the same fight against the same global system, and that fight can only be won through coordinated action across all theaters of operation. We are rising economically, technologically, politically, culturally, and we are extending an invitation that has never been offered in human history. Not for charity, not for pity, not for the kind of foreign aid that comes with strings attached and interests that contradict our own. We are calling for unity based on shared blood, shared history, shared interests, and shared destiny. We are calling for the kind of strength that emerges when family members who have been separated by force finally reunite with full awareness of their connection and their collective power. We call you not as allies in some abstract political movement, but as family returning to claim your inheritance. There is land here, millions of acres of the most fertile soil on earth, land that could feed continents if properly developed. There is work here, meaningful work that builds rather than destroys, that creates wealth for our communities rather than extracting it for distant shareholders. There is future here, a future where your children won't have to navigate hostile educational systems designed to convince them they are intellectually inferior, where their names won't be automatically rejected by employers who make assumptions based on pronunciation and cultural origin, where their natural hair won't be considered unprofessional, where their skin will be a source of pride connecting them to greatness rather than a target for discrimination. But most importantly, there is healing here, deep generational healing from wounds so profound they have been passed down through DNA. Trauma so systematic, it has shaped entire communities' responses to authority, relationships, education, and economic opportunity. Come not as tourists seeking authentic experiences to post on social media, not as missionaries bringing salvation to people you've been programmed to see as less fortunate, not as investors looking for cheap labor and exploitable resources. Come as builders ready to plant seeds that will grow into forests your great-grandchildren will rest under. Come as family members ready to contribute your skills, knowledge, and resources to the collective liberation of our people worldwide. Think beyond the artificial limitations of passports and currencies, beyond the mental prison of national boundaries created by people who never had our interests at heart. Think in terms of legacy, what you will leave for children not yet born who deserve a world where their intelligence is assumed rather than questioned, where their beauty is celebrated rather than debated, where their potential is limitless rather than predetermined by zip codes and melanin content. The world is shifting beneath our feet right now. The empire that has dominated global politics and economics for centuries is showing cracks that are becoming impossible to hide. Old power structures are failing. Traditional alliances are crumbling. Economic systems that seemed permanent are proving fragile. In this moment of unprecedented global transition, those who know who they are, who understand their history and their power, must step forward to lead the way toward whatever comes next. We will not spend another generation begging to be included at tables where we are unwelcome. We will not waste our energy trying to reform systems that were specifically designed to exclude us. We will not continue to seek validation from people who profit from our self-doubt. Instead, we will build our own tables, establish our own institutions, create our own systems of justice, education, and economic development that serve our interests and reflect our values. The time is now. The opportunity is unprecedented. The call is real and urgent. And the question that will define not just your individual life, but the trajectory of our people for generations to come is simple. Will you answer? But let me explain why this moment is different from every other moment in our history, why the stakes have never been higher, and why your response to this call will determine whether your descendants inherit freedom or more sophisticated forms of slavery. Across every continent where our people have been scattered, we have faced not just centuries of injustice, but systematic campaigns designed to erase us from history, from consciousness, from the future itself. Whether in the cotton fields of Georgia, where your ancestors' unpaid labor built American capitalism, or in the diamond mines of Sierra Leone, where African hands extracted wealth that built European cities, or in the gold mines of South Africa, where apartheid perfected the art of legal oppression, our people have been the engine of global economic development while being denied any share in the prosperity we created. The forms this oppression takes may appear different depending on geography and political systems. Police brutality in Chicago, debt slavery in Chad, educational apartheid in London, resource theft disguised as development in Nigeria. But strip away the surface differences, examine the underlying structures, and you discover they are all manifestations of the same coordinated global system. This system was not created by accident or historical happenstance. It was not the unintended consequence of cultural misunderstandings or natural economic forces. Every aspect of it was designed with mathematical precision, implemented with deliberate intent, and maintained through constant adaptation and refinement. Here's what you must understand, if you understand nothing else. Slavery was never just about obtaining free labor. If that's all they wanted, they could have used the same indentured servitude systems they employed with poor Europeans. Slavery was about something far more sinister, the complete destruction of identity, the systematic severing of connections between people and their origins, the creation of a class of human beings so disconnected from their cultural foundations that resistance would become psychologically impossible. Colonialism was never just about accessing land and resources. They could have established mutually beneficial trade relationships with African kingdoms, just as they did with powerful Asian empires they couldn't easily conquer. Colonialism was about breaking the spiritual and psychological foundation of entire civilizations, creating dependency so profound that even after political independence, former colonies would continue to serve their former masters' economic interests. Segregation in America was never only about maintaining physical separation between racial groups. If simple avoidance was the goal, they would have supported Back to Africa movements rather than fighting them. Segregation was about creating and maintaining a sense of inferiority so deep it would become self-perpetuating across generations, so that even when legal barriers were removed, psychological barriers would continue to limit what we believe possible for ourselves. And today, right now, in this moment, the economic games they play through international monetary policies, the cultural stereotypes they perpetuate through global media systems, the political manipulations they orchestrate through international organizations and foreign aid programs, all serve the same fundamental purpose they have always served: to make us forget our value, erase our history, and convince us that our power is an illusion. They need us to see ourselves through their lens, to define ourselves according to their limitations, to measure our worth by their standards, to dream only dreams they are comfortable with us achieving. Yet despite 4 centuries of the most sophisticated, well-funded, technologically advanced oppression in human history, despite every resource of every empire being deployed to break our spirits and erase our identity, we are still here. We are still creating. We are still rising. We are still refusing to accept their version of what we can become. That survival, that stubborn, magnificent refusal to disappear is itself a form of victory they never acknowledged and never celebrated, because acknowledging it would mean admitting that their entire system failed to achieve its ultimate goal. Our ancestors endured the horror of the Middle Passage and still found ways to preserve cultural elements that connect us to our origins today. They survived the brutality of plantation slavery and still created languages, music, stories, and spiritual practices that sustained community across generations. They endured the psychological warfare of Jim Crow and still built institutions, universities, businesses, churches, organizations that educated generations and created foundations for future progress. They survived the economic violence of urban disinvestment, the educational violence of underfunded schools, the medical violence of experimentation and neglect, the legal violence of mass incarceration designed to recreate slavery by other means. And they didn't just survive, they created. They transformed suffering into art so beautiful, it moves people across all cultural and racial lines. They converted struggle into intellectual frameworks that influenced liberation movements worldwide. They turned poverty into innovation, limitation into creativity, exclusion into excellence that could not be ignored or denied. Most importantly, they found each other across impossible distances, creating networks of mutual support that transcended the artificial boundaries colonizers drew on maps to divide us. That is the power they could never take away, no matter how much violence they used, no matter how sophisticated their methods became, no matter how much money they spent on programs designed to convince us we were powerless. It's the power that flows through your bloodstream right now as you hear these words. It's the power that connects you instantly and intimately to people you've never met who share your experiences across continents and cultures. There is a connection so deep it transcends spoken language between a black child born in Detroit and one born in Dakar, between a young woman organizing for justice in Atlanta and one fighting for dignity in Accra, between a teacher struggling with underfunded schools in Chicago and a farmer fighting for land rights in Burkina Faso, between an entrepreneur building businesses in Brooklyn and an innovator creating solutions in Nairobi. Even when we speak different languages, practice different religions, salute different flags, our stories are intertwined like DNA strands. We carry the same genetic memory of resistance. We share the same inherited wisdom about survival and thriving under impossible circumstances. We possess the same creative genius that transforms obstacles into opportunities. We are descendants of people who looked at systems designed to destroy them and said, no, we will not be broken. We will not disappear. We will not accept your definition of what we can become. That refusal, that magnificent, stubborn, unbreakable refusal is coded in our DNA, and it activates whenever we truly connect with each other across the artificial divisions they created to keep us weak. But here's what I need you to understand about this moment in history. Resilience alone is no longer sufficient. Survival, while necessary, cannot be our ultimate goal. We cannot spend another generation simply enduring systems designed to limit us, hoping that if we work hard enough and prove ourselves worthy enough, they will eventually accept us as fully human. We must build. We must create new systems that serve our interests rather than exploit them. We must rise with complete awareness of who we are, where we come from, and what we are capable of achieving when we work together with shared purpose. Our strength is not just emotional or spiritual, though those dimensions are crucial. Our strength is intellectual. We have produced some of the most brilliant minds in every field of human knowledge. Our strength is cultural. We have created forms of artistic expression that shape global consciousness. Our strength is economic. Collectively, we control trillions of dollars in resources and consumer spending power. Our strength is political. We have the numbers and the organization to influence policy at every level of government. Most importantly, our strength is collective. When we work together across artificial boundaries of nationality, class, and ideology, we become capable of achievements that seem impossible when we work as isolated individuals or competing factions. We must begin to act with unity of purpose, with clear strategic intention, and with long-term vision that extends beyond immediate crises to encompass generational transformation. The lies that have kept us divided have served their purpose long enough. The myths that convinced us we had nothing in common with each other have outlived their usefulness to them, not to us. Africa is not separate from Black America, and Black America is not isolated from Africa. The Caribbean is not disconnected from both continents. Black Europeans are not facing fundamentally different challenges. We are one people, scattered by historical forces but connected by shared experiences, shared interests, and shared destiny. Our enemies have always understood this truth. That's why they invest so heavily in keeping us apart, in making us see each other as strangers, in convincing us that our differences are more significant than our similarities. The truth they work so hard to hide is that our shared struggle should no longer be just a source of pain and trauma, but the foundation for the most powerful unity movement in human history. The systems that oppressed us were global in scope, coordinated in implementation, and consistent in purpose across different continents and different time periods. Our response must match their scope, coordination, and consistency. We must reach across oceans, literally and figuratively, and recognize each other as family members who have been separated by violence but never truly lost to each other. We must rebuild connections that were deliberately torn apart, not to return to some romanticized version of the past, but to claim the future that belongs to us. For centuries, we have remained standing in the face of everything they could throw at us. That strength, that incredible, tested, proven strength, must now be transformed into movement, into strategy, into coordinated action that changes the fundamental balance of power in the world. We are not scattered seeds blown randomly by historical winds. We are roots of the same magnificent tree, and the deeper our roots connect beneath the surface, the stronger our branches will grow above ground, the more abundant our fruit will be, the more shade we can provide for future generations. Now I want to address something that goes to the very heart of how you see yourself and your place in the world. We are not here to beg for inclusion in systems that were designed to exclude us. We are not here to wait for approval from people who profit from our self-doubt. We are not here to plead for space at tables where our presence makes others uncomfortable. The time for seeking validation from our oppressors ended long ago. The era of measuring our progress by their standards, celebrating when they acknowledge our humanity as if it were a gift they had the right to give or withhold, accepting their definitions of success as if they understood what success means for people who have faced what we have faced. That era is over. We are not victims, despite centuries of systematic efforts to convince us that victimhood is our permanent identity. We have been victimized. No honest person can deny that reality. We have suffered injustices that would have destroyed other peoples entirely. But suffering is something that happened to us, not something we are. We are defined not by what was done to us, but by how we responded to what was done to us. We are defined by our refusal to be broken, our insistence on creating beauty in the midst of ugliness, our determination to find joy despite every attempt to crush our spirits. We are defined by our will to overcome circumstances that were specifically designed to be insurmountable, to transform obstacles into opportunities, to rise above limitations that were supposed to be permanent. That is who we are. That is who we have always been, even when we temporarily forgot due to the intensity of psychological warfare directed against us. There are forces in this world that profit from keeping us trapped in cycles of dependency. They need us to believe that we cannot survive without their systems, their institutions, their approval. They want us to think that without their jobs, their schools, their loans, their programs designed to help us, we would collapse into chaos and dysfunction. But that belief is the foundation of the most successful lie ever told in human history. Black people have been creating, building, inventing, organizing, and leading since the dawn of human civilization. Long before the first European learned to navigate beyond coastal waters, long before the concept of racial hierarchy was invented to justify slavery and colonization, long before any of the systems that currently dominate the world existed, we were developing mathematical concepts that form the basis of modern engineering. We were creating architectural techniques that produce structures still standing thousands of years later. We were establishing trade networks that connected 3 continents. We were governing societies with legal and political systems so sophisticated they influenced civilizations around the world. We were practicing medicine that treated not just physical symptoms, but understood the connection between mental, spiritual, and physical health. We were developing agricultural techniques that sustained large populations without depleting natural resources. We were creating art, literature, and music that expressed the full range of human experience and emotion. We were living in harmony with natural systems, understanding ecological relationships that modern environmentalists are only beginning to appreciate. We were raising children in community structures that ensured every child had multiple sources of guidance, protection, and unconditional love. That innovative, creative leadership capacity is still within us. It was never lost or destroyed, only suppressed and redirected by systems designed to exploit our talents while denying us the benefits of our own creativity and labor. What must change now, what must change immediately, is how we see ourselves and what we believe is possible when we work together with shared purpose and coordinated strategy. We must stop allowing others to define our intelligence, our capabilities, our potential. We must reject their assessments of our character, their predictions about our future, their explanations of our past. We are not less intelligent, less capable, less valuable, less deserving than anyone who has ever lived. We are not broken people in need of fixing by others who supposedly understand our needs better than we do. We are not projects for charitable organizations to showcase their goodwill toward the less fortunate. We are capable of healing ourselves, educating ourselves, organizing ourselves, and creating systems of governance, economics, and social organization that reflect our values and serve our interests. We are not a people to be saved by benevolent outsiders. We are a people to be respected, collaborated with, and learned from by anyone wise enough to recognize what we have contributed to human civilization despite every obstacle placed in our path. It is psychologically comfortable to fall into the role of victim when the weight of injustice is overwhelming. It is tempting to wait for rescue when systems seem designed specifically to crush your spirit and limit your options. But we must remember a truth that our ancestors knew even in the darkest moments of their experience. No one is coming to save us. The cavalry is not riding over the hill to rescue us from our circumstances. The benevolent government program that will finally solve our problems does not exist. The philanthropist who will lift us out of poverty without expecting something in return is a fantasy. The international organization that will defend our interests without advancing their own agenda is an illusion. The people who will liberate us are ourselves, working together with the same level of coordination, strategic thinking, and long-term planning that our oppressors have used against us for centuries. The power to transform our circumstances is already in our hands. It has always been in our hands, but we must choose to use it collectively, systematically, and strategically. That means taking responsibility for educating our children in truth, rather than leaving their intellectual development to people who profit from their ignorance. That means controlling our own economic resources rather than allowing others to extract wealth from our communities while giving us nothing in return except debt and dependency. That means telling our own stories through our own media rather than accepting narratives created by people who have never experienced our reality and have no investment in our success. That means building our own systems of justice that actually provide justice rather than begging for reform of systems designed to criminalize our existence. That means creating our own institutions of higher learning that prepare our young people for leadership rather than employment in systems that will never fully value their contributions. That means developing our own healthcare systems that address not just physical symptoms, but the psychological and spiritual damage caused by living under oppression. Most importantly, it means refusing to be satisfied with symbolic victories and surface-level changes, while fundamental power structures remain unchanged and hostile to our interests. Don't be deceived by performances of progress designed to make you think significant change is happening when the essential relationships of power remain exactly the same. The world often celebrates our struggles while ignoring our solutions, honors our pain while dismissing our analysis, acknowledges our suffering while rejecting our demands for structural change. They love the image of black resilience when it comes with tears, trauma, and ultimate acceptance of subordinate status. They are comfortable with our anger as long as it doesn't translate into independent action. They will even celebrate our achievements as long as those achievements don't threaten their control over the resources and institutions that determine life outcomes for millions of people. But we must change that narrative completely. We must show the world what black power actually looks like when it is unapologetic, self-determined, forward-moving, and absolutely unstoppable. We must honor our ancestors, not by repeating their suffering or dwelling endlessly on their pain, but by completing the mission they started. They dreamed of true freedom, not just the absence of legal restrictions, but the presence of real power to determine our own destiny. They dreamed of sovereignty, the right to govern ourselves according to our own values and interests. They dreamed of unity, the reunification of our people scattered across the globe by forces beyond their control. That dream, that vision, that mission is now our responsibility, not just to hope for it, or pray for it, or wait for it to happen through the benevolence of others, but to build it through our own efforts, our own resources, our own strategic coordination. It is time to reclaim the narrative of who we are and what we are capable of achieving. We are not burdens on any society. We are the creative and productive force that built every society we have been part of. We are not outsiders looking for inclusion. We are original peoples whose innovations and labor created the foundations of modern civilization. We are not problems to be solved by others. We are solutions waiting to be implemented by ourselves. Everything they said we could not do, we have already done under circumstances that would have broken any other people in human history. Everything they predicted we would never achieve, we have achieved despite their active opposition and systematic sabotage. Now we must go further. We must lead in ways that are not just symbolic but structural, not just inspirational but institutional, not just individual but collective. We must stop asking for inclusion in systems that were specifically designed to exclude us. We must stop seeking approval from people who profit from our self-doubt. We must stop trying to reform institutions that function exactly as they were intended to function. Instead, we must create our own systems, build our own institutions, establish our own networks of mutual support and collective advancement. The world will try to keep us in the role of dependent people because it is easier to control those who believe they need permission to act in their own interests. But the truth is simple and powerful. We don't need them. We need each other. We need unity that transcends national boundaries and ideological differences. We need clarity that cuts through propaganda and misinformation. We need shared purpose that gives meaning to individual struggles by connecting them to collective liberation. We need courage that sustains us through the inevitable challenges and setbacks that come with any effort to transform fundamental power relationships. That is how we stop being seen as victims and begin walking as the leaders we have always been, even when leadership was denied to us in their systems. Let them see us not with pity or sympathy, but with respect and recognition of our power. And if they cannot give that respect, we will stand tall without it, because we know who we are, and that knowledge is sufficient foundation for everything we need to build. Now, I want to share with you something that will fundamentally change how you understand global politics, economics, and social movements. There is a pattern in history that repeats so consistently it cannot be coincidental. Every single time black people have begun to unite across national boundaries, ethnic differences, and class divisions, those who control global power structures have moved swiftly and decisively to disrupt that unity before it could reach critical mass. This is not paranoia. This is not conspiracy theory. This is documented historical fact, and the documentation exists in their own archives, their own government records, their own corporate communications. When Marcus Garvey built the largest mass movement in black history, connecting African Americans with Africans and Caribbean people around shared interests and coordinated action, they didn't just attack him personally. They infiltrated his organization, sabotaged his business ventures, and ultimately imprisoned and deported him to prevent his movement from achieving its goals. When the Black Panther Party began building international connections with liberation movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, when they started providing concrete examples of what self-determination could look like in practice, they didn't just criticize their politics. They assassinated their leaders, destroyed their programs, and launched a campaign of psychological warfare designed to turn black communities against them. When African independence movements began coordinating with each other and with civil rights organizations in America, when leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, and Malcolm X started building bridges between African and African American struggles, they didn't just oppose their policies, they orchestrated coups, assassinations, and destabilization campaigns that are still affecting African politics today. The pattern is clear to anyone willing to examine the evidence objectively. The global system that dominates world politics and economics today is not afraid of our individual voices, no matter how eloquent. It is not threatened by our protests, no matter how large. It is not intimidated by our anger, no matter how justified. What it fears most, what causes them to deploy massive resources and take extraordinary risks, is the possibility of true, strategic, coordinated unity among black people worldwide. When the children of Africa, whether born in Lagos or Chicago, in Kingston or London, in Sao Paulo or Paris, begin to recognize each other as one people with shared interests and collective power, the entire balance of global power begins to shift in ways that threaten the foundations of the current world order. For centuries, we have been kept apart, not just by physical distance, but by carefully constructed lies designed to make us see each other as strangers, competitors, or even enemies. They tell African Americans that Africa is a continent of poverty, disease, and backwardness, with nothing to offer except a reminder of primitiveness they should be grateful to have escaped. They tell Africans that African Americans are spoiled, disconnected from their roots, and more interested in material success than authentic culture. They convince Caribbean people that their experience is unique and unconnected to struggles on either side of the Atlantic. They persuade black Europeans that their challenges are fundamentally different from those faced by black people in other parts of the world. These lies have been repeated so often, through so many different channels, reinforced by so many different institutions, that many of our own people have internalized them as truth, rather than recognizing them as strategic propaganda designed to keep us weak and divided. But anyone willing to look beyond surface differences can see the fundamental truth. We are exponentially stronger together than we could ever be apart, and our oppressors have always understood this better than we have. When Black America rises, the entire world pays attention. The civil rights movement inspired liberation struggles on every continent. The Black Power movement influenced revolutionary thinking from Africa to Asia to Latin America. Hip-hop culture, born in the housing projects of New York, now speaks to oppressed people in languages from Arabic to Mandarin to Portuguese. But imagine the power of those movements if they had been supported not just by solidarity statements and cultural exchanges, but by coordinated economic and political action from an entire continent. Imagine if every struggle for justice in America was backed not just by hashtags and symbolic gestures, but by governments, resources, and strategic coordination from 54 African nations working in unity. And imagine if Africa's rise, which is happening right now, despite what their media tells you, was not left to the whims of foreign corporations and international monetary policies controlled by our former colonizers, but was supported and accelerated by the vision, capital, technological expertise, and global networks of 70 million African Americans, plus millions more in the Caribbean, Europe, and Latin America. That connection is not a fantasy. It is not a utopian dream that ignores practical realities. It is the most realistic path to liberation for all of us, and it is absolutely achievable within our lifetimes if we have the courage to pursue it systematically. The system that currently dominates global politics and economics is built on keeping us separated and suspicious of each other. It thrives when we see each other as competitors rather than collaborators. It wins when we prioritize our differences over our commonalities. It profits when we are divided by shade of skin, by accent, by nationality, by class, by the artificial distinctions they have trained us to see as more important than our shared interests. Because when we are divided, we are easier to exploit economically, easier to silence politically, easier to control culturally, easier to convince that our problems are local rather than global, individual rather than systemic. But unity, real unity, based on shared understanding and coordinated action, changes everything. Unity commands respect rather than begging for it. Unity builds independent economic systems rather than depending on theirs. Unity protects communities from external exploitation rather than hoping for protection from those who profit from that exploitation. Unity creates new rules of engagement rather than accepting their terms forever. We are living through the most significant transition in global power relationships since the end of World War II. Old empires that have dominated for centuries are losing their grip on resources, markets, and political influence. New centers of power are emerging in regions they can no longer control through traditional methods. Economic systems that seemed permanent are proving fragile when confronted by coordinated resistance. The question that will define the next century is whether we will remain scattered and reactive, responding to changes initiated by others, or whether we will come together proactively and shape the emerging world order according to our own interests and values. That unity does not require us to become identical. We do not need to speak the same language, practice the same religion, or adopt uniform cultural practices. What we need is shared strategic vision, mutual respect across our differences, and commitment to collective liberation that transcends individual or national interests. The connection between Africa and Black America is not just emotional, it's strategic. Africa holds what Black America lacks: vast land, unmatched resources, and cultural continuity. It's a place where sovereignty isn't a dream. It's possible. It offers freedom from the systems that profit off your labor while denying your legacy. And Black America brings what Africa needs: experience navigating Western power structures, massive economic influence, global visibility, and institutional access that could shift the balance of power worldwide. Together, this is more than a reunion. It's a revolution. But it doesn't start with governments. It starts with you. It starts with relationships, not charity trips or token gestures, but real partnerships built on shared struggle and shared vision. It starts with learning. Black Americans studying governance and sovereignty in Africa, and Africans learning how to move through global systems built to shut them out. It starts with investing, not handouts, but mutual empowerment, economic, cultural, and spiritual. It starts with solidarity, not just for celebrations, but when communities are under siege, when voices are silenced, when young people need guidance. Most of all, it starts with mindset, dismantling the mental walls colonialism and racism have built between us, and recognizing we are not strangers, we are one people, long divided. The world fears that unity because they know it would be unstoppable, and they're right to fear it, because once we realize that our destinies are bound, no empire, no system, no lie can stand in our way. This is not some distant dream. It begins the moment you decide that disconnection is no longer acceptable. It's time. The bridge is waiting. Cross it.